Rich. Thank you, Andy, for that. Was a very interesting sort of talk. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right. I've been following the developments within the natural capital sort of policy sort of framework since about 2011. After the Hoof campaign, it was sort of posited back then as a sort of safe middle ground between straight privatisation and the continuation of state ownership. And I recently, within the last few months, questioned DEFRA's head of the environment in the 25-year plan, and I put it to him that this is actually a form of privatisation by proxy, because it allows financial firms, multinational companies to hold the natural assets and basically trade them on financial markets for profit. So the public narratives around natural assets so far have relied on redefining the definitions of common sort of phrases, things like natural assets and valuing. By natural assets, of course, they mean financial assets predicated on various forms of data extraction from the natural world. By valuing, they mean commodifying, redefining nature as a financial asset and managing it as such, and letting the financial sector trade in ecosystem services and the products that are derived therefrom. As we know, very few people understand this kind of thing, and I was surprised to see it not really covered in your talk, but that's usually what sort of happens. So this would enable market speculation within the public forestry estate without actually transferring the ownership of land. Benefits would continue to flow back to DEFRA and Forestry England, as they evidently still consider themselves the owners of the public forestry estate, and foreign multinationals, financial firms would hold these assets and trade them for profit. And so my question is, when is the time for a candid public consultation about these issues? Because we've had nothing of the sort.
It's a fair point, and it's one that should be opened and discussed openly. The way that we've been dealing with natural capital in North Devon has not been sort of geared towards the wild west of the carbon markets that were. We certainly saw there's the folks doing it in Africa, where we're working at the villages and creating sort of carbon credits and experiments, and they were being sold as kind of $1-2 a ton of carbon saved. It was back then, and then you'd suddenly find on the secondary market people buy these and then trade them off at sort of $20-30 a ton. And it was those secondary markets, none of the benefits came back. So we've been designing those things out of the system as we've been developing it in North Devon. So that, who are the beneficiaries, who's the actual sort of rights holders for these things, and making sure that benefits come back to the locals. Plus, we're also we've got a policy where we're vetting the people who are actually going to do the investment. So we're not actually sort of saying it's going to go back to the big financial houses, etc. We want the investment to actually come back and sort of be available for the local people as well. So if it's a company that's going to invest and wants to buy the carbon credits, they have to show that they've actually gone down a net zero route in the first place, because offsetting is the last step that anybody should do. You should actually try to minimize emissions by working through those in the first place. So we've been having debates within our partnership about those values and how they work. How it works in DEFRA's sort of point of view. I mean, if you look at the long-term projections about their support for agro-environment, you can see that they're dwindling and they're looking for private sector to boost up. But it has to be ethical investment. It can't be anything but, and that's where we again would use our demonstration to sort of make sure that those values are going through, to make sure it stays as an ethical investment and not something that's just sort of taken over by a faceless investment market.
I have a second one. I did.
But quickly, Tom, because you haven't got time to respond.
Obviously, it's not just the carbon that's being sort of commodified. It's biodiversity, water resources, right across the board. And I hope you say that you have confidence that you can sort of work these things out of the system. I mean, you're talking about the New York Stock Exchange and Wall Street and the city trading, commodifying the assets of the natural world, the entire natural world, but specifically the public forestry estate. And this is where that fight's going to be had, basically. If they can do it here, they can do it anywhere in the PFA. They probably know that. So yeah, this is the other question that I had briefly was: are you aware of the history of UNESCO? Julian Huxley, the founder of UNESCO, immediately after the Second World War, 48, I believe, 47. He was the UK's leading eugenicist. And this kind of explains UNESCO's role around the world in ethnically cleansing indigenous populations and clearing them off the land to make way for various forms of sort of nature reserves and things. I mean, this has been well documented by groups like Survival International. Are you aware of this kind of thing? Because I am very aware.
Yeah, it's not the UNESCO I recognise at all.
You look into the history of it, you'll find a very different UNESCO.
Yeah, but it's not the UNESCO that certainly is there today, I can assure you. And it's, if anything...
They've got better PR.
If anything, if I can continue, I mean, I've seen, yes, some places in China where they have tried to do that. That's been the Chinese government's interpretation of what a UNESCO site is, not the UNESCO value at all. And we find that actually they'll actually decried and had to move the people back in. And so, no, that's not a UNESCO that I recognise a value at all. I mean, we do a lot of work with indigenous peoples and all over the place. In Canada with reconciliation, for example. And we've been having special working groups about indigenous peoples and their rights. And there's all sorts of things enshrined in the cultural convention, for example. So I think what you may be looking at is either very old history or just disinformation, right?
So this one's going to run and run, I think.
Yeah, I'll for now.
We've just baited everybody's trap here, so we go on talking about this and again. But I'm sorry, we have to move on now to the next speaker to get the end of the time.